where Jamaica, considering their prospects within such a movement, had a national referendum where the majority opted to leave that proposed arrangement. And you know, heard about a famous quote by Eric Williams at the time that says, "One from 10 leaves zero." So we saw the demise of the West Indies Federation in 1958. However, the problems persisted, the vision continued. And in 1965, thereabouts, we had Antigua, the leader of Antigua Bird, you had Barbados and Guyana agreeing to form CARIFTA, which was a Caribbean Free Trade Association. And a number of other Caribbean countries joined in the ensuing 2 years. And that eventually morphed into CARICOM in 1973. So that's a short history. But underpinning that was the goal to transform the lives for Caribbean people, but more importantly, a recognition of the challenges that as small developing states with small populations, limited resource base, limited capacity, that it was best if we collaborate, cooperate, and come together. So that was the driving force for the formation of the CARICOM in 1973.
Okay. And we'll come back to some of the focal points as drafted within the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which brought about CARICOM. But Che, let me just come to you. And why do you believe there was optimism in 1973 among our Caribbean leaders to form CARICOM when just 10 years prior, 1962, we had the expiration of the Federation, the one from 10 leaves north scenario, the referendum by the Jamaicans essentially not wanting to associate with the smaller quote-unquote islands. But yet there still seemed to be some level of optimism, or is it realism, as being posited by Aaron, as to why in 73 there was the belief among the leaders that they can do better than the Federation.
Well, thanks, Colin, and good evening to your listening viewers as well as those tuning in on social media. Aaron gave a very good historical overview where we've come from with respect to the Federation up until the forming of CARICOM in 1973. You know, listen, I think anytime you have a converging of dynamic countries, albeit small states, as we are, I think you're always going to have a dispute and you're always going to have conflict. You have to remember that, and even though it predated me by maybe 10 or 15 years or so, you're talking about a period of time when we were still under colonial dependency, 1958, and then as we got into the mid to late 1960s and certainly early in the 1970s, countries began to become independent. You started to see a breaking away of what we now know as CARICOM from the likes of Britain. A lot of the political conflict that ensued a little bit during the Federation period, a lot of it had to do with governance structure and questions of authority and the balancing act that had to be played between United Kingdom and the members of the Federation. But as the late 60s and early 70s began to ensue, you started to see countries going at it in terms of the independence. We having our own independence in 1974. And I think that created some optimism. And I think once you start, if you think of a child or someone who's becoming of age, there's an anticipation, there is disputes up until the point of independence of sort, or emancipation from the home. And the moment you become emancipated or you leave your home from your parents or your family, there's a very strange unity that somehow is created that probably did not exist prior to you becoming emancipated. And a little bit of that has happened over the last 50 years and certainly around the inception of CARICOM in 1973. That optimism that was created as a result of you had the Black Power movement, you had Black nationalism, and you had that profound desire from visionary leaders that Aaron mentioned to become independent, to break away, to forge their own destinies and to forge their own path. And I think that inherently and perhaps strange enough created its own optimism and allowed what we now know to be a lot of the great achievements over the last 50 years.
Let me just go back to something that you said earlier, because you said part of the challenge with the federation was one of the governance structure. As we are aware, federation was created by an act of the British Parliament, the Caribbean Federation Act, and it named a prime minister who was became Sir Grantley Adams of Barbados. Then the Premier of Barbados had a Governor General, and the cabinet was to his choosing, very much like our own parliamentary election system. So you basically had a superstructure that was the federation, and leaders within the various islands had to be subservient to, for want of a better word, that superstructure that was the Caribbean, that was the federation, that was that political union among the 10 islands. Do you believe that was the major challenge, that as leaders, it was difficult for a leader in Jamaica to be subservient to a prime minister in Barbados?
Well, I think that might be part of it. I don't know if I would reduce it to there being internal or inter-island conflict one with another. That might be a small part of it. But I think, listen, we're in 2023, and we still have our nationals, those who want to be emancipated and removed from the crown. And you're beginning to see that type of republicanism narrative taking shape over the last several years, and with Barbados most recently in our Caribbean community. So I think there might be a little bit of that. But I think anytime when you're coming out during that period of that type of late 60s, early 70s desire and quest to become independent, as was the movement that was taking place around that time, I think it becomes a very difficult proposition to be governed, and the idea of being governed from those who live 2,000 miles away and those who have no substantive and real day-to-day, albeit by way of proxy. But I think it becomes a very difficult proposition when you have islands of the Caribbean and you have nationals and within member states being governed by those who have no real substantive and tangible appreciation for what's happening in the islands. And I think an amalgamation of those two issues is what began to see the breaking away.
All right, and that would have led to independence. Why there was that movement to move. There is a philosophy that says really we became a drain on the economy of the UK, and they were encouraging us to leave as well. So it was a combination of nationalism, but also just the reality of economics within the UK not needing or wanting to have too many dependents, and hence we were encouraged to go our own ways, almost like you turn 18 and parents putting you out of the house, kind of a thing. Having said that, though, in your own words, that formation of CARICOM in 73, as they would have met in Trinidad, Chaguaramas. What would you say, in addition, would have been the vision? I get the sense of nationalism that led to independence, but nationalism and regionalism are different. And what would you say, in your own words, led to the regionalism in terms of approach that led to the Treaty of Chaguaramas and the formation of CARICOM?
Well, I think member states began to realize, certainly the leaders began to realize, that they were perhaps better off, even albeit removed from Britain, they were better off together and functioning and operating and cooperating together than they were by themselves. And I think a lot of that thinking, that visionary thinking by those early leaders, is captured in the community's pillars. When they talk about functional cooperation, they talk about economic integration, and as much as they possibly can foreign policy coordination, that kind of thing. I think that was a type of thinking, the Fords Burnhams, the Eric Williams, and so on. I think that was the kind of thinking that perhaps served part of the motivation to be able to come together in what we now know as the Treaty of Chaguaramas.
Okay. Aaron, if I'm to bring you in here and share a little bit for the understanding of our viewers, the structure of CARICOM. We moved away from that political party system in a federation. What really is that structure that governs this Caribbean community?
Well, to explain that, to take off where she has left us, but by the late 60s, early 70s, the leaders at the time must have recognized that what's possible. They had to be very pragmatic. You had the challenges that I mentioned earlier on. Jamaica, Trinidad, and Tobago led with independence. They are beginning to see the challenges of managing their own territories, albeit the fact that, like I said, we are becoming expensive appendages, and it was difficult to continue with the model that existed before. And at the same time, that nationalism, there now become, responsibilities, because now you're in charge. What are your options? What do you do? So that reality was hitting home. The separation of waters, the lack of inclusivity, the decision taken by the policymakers in the UK. So all those realities, I think, were popping up. And so by then, there was a recognition that we needed to collaborate, to share resources, to treat with the challenges that were immense, significant unemployment, etc. And at the same time, appreciating that a political union was not feasible. It was not going to happen, whether we talk about insularity, lack of understanding, lack of communication, perceptions that we better than you, we bigger than you, and all those, realities that the heads recognize. So you had two polarities. One, the need to do it, it makes sense, but here are the challenges. So how do we navigate? And I think the CARICOM model attempted to address that. And they begin to see possibilities. What areas can we collaborate on? And that is why, as Shay mentioned, functional cooperation became extremely important. So the structure reflected that. So you had this organization that is structured in such a way where you had the CARICOM heads at the top, and then we had a council of ministers. And those ministers were responsible for focusing on different functional areas, such as trade, education, health, And so what can we collaborating? What are our immediate pressing needs? Do we need to introduce health programs that can treat with one of the common issues that is facing all our islands? And so that sort of recognition led to how CARICOM was structured. So at the top, you have the heads of government, then you have council of ministers, then you have different organs, and below that you have, specific organizations targeting specific areas within the livelihood of Caribbean people. So CARICOM reflected possibilities. What can be done incrementally over time? What are the important things we need to address? And at the same time, recognizing that if we collaborate, so for instance, a common foreign policy was a very important agreement, because if we can all collaborate and treat with the outside world with a common approach, the benefits are much greater. The possibilities of people picking off one against the other and cutting deals here or there was not in the best interest of Caribbean people. From an economic perspective, as you may have read, the Arthur Lewis, a famous Caribbean economic thinker, he posited industrialization by invitation as one of the possibilities that can take us from the 1950s coming through, which essentially says that here we have trainable, intelligent people in the Caribbean. What is required is capital investment to come in. And we marry the two, and we can become effective, efficient producers. And that model was pursued. We had the Fiscal Incentive Act of 1974 consolidated, and prior to that. So there was a series of incentives given to business entrepreneurs to come into the Caribbean, set up manufacturing operations, employ trainable, talented, hardworking Caribbean people. And hopefully that would make a significant dent on our employment. But what happened? When that concessions ran out, we had companies going from island to island. So there was trading of islands against each other. So that was obviously a significant weakness. So again, that brought home the importance of having common policies, common monitoring and implementation mechanisms to avoid that. So that again consolidated the notion that we needed to collaborate, have common policies, have common programs to prevent the occurrences of things like that.
Allow me to interrupt you here, Aaron, because I mean, I think you're citing issues here, and I'll go back to the question in terms of the structure. We have a heads of government that, as far as I'm aware, they meet twice per year. We have councils of ministers on education, on health, on trade. I don't know that they meet more frequently than twice per year. There is the CARICOM Secretariat, which is based in Guyana. But I still ask for our viewers, what is the structure? What is the structure that brings about that oneness? What is the structure that brings about that single unit or gives the opportunity for a oneness or a single unit? Twice per year meetings. If the cabinet of the government of Grenada only met twice per year, nothing will get done. So where is the structure? What is the structure that would lead to success, that would lead to that collaboration that you're pointing towards that is important for our mutual success?
Well, I alluded to the fact that functional cooperation, I would argue, is one of the greatest success of CARICOM. And that is the responsibilities of the ministers. So the ministers of health will get together to pursue certain common programs to treat with health. So the minister responsible for trade, and that's one of the most active organs of CARICOM, right? They get together quite frequently, more than the heads, and they focus on solving our trade issues. So the functional cooperation, which really is driven by the Council of Ministers, is where a lot of the issues in the regions are addressed.
Okay, and let's just stick to that, because so are you saying that there have been improvement when we started off as a CARICOM region in adopting Sir Arthur Lewis's philosophy, and when concessions ran out, as you articulated, people started moving from island to island, organizations, investors started moving from island to island. That I don't know has expired.
Yes, in the sense that it served us well then, but it has evolved into, a more sophisticated and improved approaches since then. But I cited that as an example where, functional cooperation, collaboration was necessary. And we learned from that single experience. But there are many others. Now, how your question has been coined points to, the performance over the years. Now, certainly there have been high and low points in CARICOM over the period, and we can talk about that going forward. But when you look at it collectively, I would argue that there have been more benefits. Certainly, we should have achieved a hell of a lot more, and we can talk about why. But over time, given the challenges, and if you look at the challenges, a lot of it had to do with resources available to drive initiatives, the implementation challenges, implementation deficit, where a lot of things were agreed, but nothing gets done as ministers and prime ministers go back to their country. And there are reasons for that. And the lack of political will in some cases.
Right. And I want us to just go a little bit structure, on the structure, just so that we can understand. We have you named as ambassador to CARICOM, taking over from former ambassador and my good friend, Ali Gill. But if I'm to ask, what is the role of an ambassador to CARICOM, so that our audience can understand what do we expect of, Ambassador Aaron Moses, or what ought to have been expected of former Ambassador Ali Gill? How would you respond to that?
Well, ambassadors are central roles, irrespective of whether you're to CARICOM or to the OECS or to the European community. And your primary role is to pursue the interests of your country. collaborating with third parties for the mutual benefit of everyone. But your primary role is pursuing and seeking the interests of your country for the mutual benefits of its citizens and collaborating with like-minded third parties to achieve benefits for both parties. Okay. Put it simply.
Colin, if I may, chime in.
Yes, please.
I think I'll further to what Aaron is saying. I think the answer is found in this document that I carry around with me no matter where I go, and that is the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Coming out of the original treaty, I think the original treaty really dealt with a sort of institutional and broad framework and had laid the groundwork for what we now know as community law in terms of a governance structure. But I think with the inclusion of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which includes the CSME, the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, that then focus on the specific regimes, the movement of persons, movement of goods, services, labor, capital. I think that's when the business of CARICOM, I think, feels real, becomes tangible to nationals in member states. So I think the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas in 2001, July of 2001, July 5th, signing 2001, and the inclusion of CSME, the idea that someone can get up and travel from one member state to another, specifically for the purposes of work, the idea that someone can move from one member state to another and establish a business, that sort of thing, I think that hits home with the average national. And I think that becomes a very real, tangible benefit when we start talking CARICOM. The revised treaty, 2001, I think was the beginning of a different trajectory, a different tone, and a different type of real benefit that nationals were able to be able to get. So 2001, I would say.
So just continue to develop on that point, please. And if you can chat, I mean, and I get you too, so the last 22 years, we should have seen a different movement. But let's reflect on the 50, inclusive of the last 22 years. And some of the achievements that you would cite as good for the CARICOM, good for the Caribbean community.
Well, I think principally, and we don't necessarily make these types of correlations. You know, we just came out of a CXC period with our young people at secondary school level. The CXC construct is an institution of CARICOM. We don't perhaps make that type of connection. The institutions, the University of the West Indies, institutions of CARICOM. Grenada has been the beneficiary of having many nationals, fathers, sons, daughters who have gone to the UWI or gone to the University of Guyana. We've had a very large Guyanese population, certainly since I was coming up in school and continues to be so, who have come out of the University of Guyana system. You go to the supermarket, in terms of movement of goods and goods that are of community origin, or in other words, that come from the CARICOM space, that do not incur duties. You go, you buy your Grace ketchup, you buy your evaporated milk, your Nestle products from Trinidad and Tobago, that sort of thing. You buy a 3-star box of matches, your Baron seasoning, and it's not a plug for anybody, but these are real, substantive, and tangible, albeit we may not be able to make the connection of the benefits and the achievements of CARICOM. When we have disasters, in some instances every year for some of the member states, Tropical Storm Maria in Dominica, Ivan, the support that are provided by CDIMA, the support coming out of COVID-19 with respect to CAFA, aviation structure and its regulation coming out of the Caribbean Air Services, CASOS institution. I mean, all of these institutions and its associate institutions, I would say, are direct achievements of CARICOM. We may not be able to always articulate it like that. But they're there, they're real, they're tangible. And particularly when people start moving, if a man feels that he can move from here to Trinidad and Tobago without any hassle and do so seamlessly, or a woman can go to work from here in Barbados and do so seamlessly, then CARICOM, as far as they are concerned, is working. But CARICOM has always been working, albeit with some challenge. But the benefits are there, the achievements are there, and it's just for us to build upon.
So you cited a number of regional institutions as being some of the benefits of CARICOM over the last 50 years. If you can just bring it home to Grenadians, as to how has Grenada benefited from its membership in CARICOM. What are 2 or 3 of the things that you would cite just to bring it home to our audience or our local audience?
Well, I think the most, as I indicated before, I think the most tangible has to be the freedom of movement of persons. I think we have an establishment of businesses. I don't want to start rattling off names on television, but we have several companies in Grenada that are CARICOM companies. We have security services, companies in the security services. We have companies that are in debt recovery. We have those who are in the hotel industry. We have other nationals who have simply come by way of employment. That's a real benefit of CARICOM. We have a lot of member states. For years, Barbados has been the recipient of a lot of our nationals who have come out of the TAMCC hospitality arrangement to study and to work at the various resorts in Barbados. We have, of course, we have those who have gone to the likes of Trinidad and Tobago. So the freedom of movement, I think, is a very real and substantive benefit of the CSME. One of the CSME benefits. We also have, going back to the businesses, the idea of you being able to pick up and go to Barbados. We have a Grenadian who's been in Barbados for the last 10 or 15 years, and he is in the business of doing roofs. And he said to us that he has done more roofs in 1 year in Barbados than he can do in 3 or 4 years in Grenada. So the idea of spreading your entrepreneurial options and having that diverse area as opposed to 112,000 consumer population or potential client population. You have the 17 or so million within the CARICOM space and another 6 or so 7 million within the context of the OECS space. You also have even within the CARICOM, you have, remember, the carve out for the OECS countries. OECS countries, all of them are also members of CARICOM, and you also have carve out for member states, countries that nationals that move into the OECS space that don't have.
But we'll get into the OECS. We'll get into the OECS separately. It is time because I want to drill down on some of the things that you would have mentioned: free movement of people, the ease of setting up business within territories. So we'll get back to what that reality has looked like in Grenada and for Grenadians. But it is time for us to take our first break. So viewers, listeners, our first break, we'll be right back.
GRENDEC Community Partnership Initiative.
It's our water, sanitation, and hygiene project whereby we seek to address some of the sanitation issues at our primary schools here on island to create comfortable washroom environments for our students and the staff in general and ensure that there is water available throughout. Thank you so much, GRENDEC. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Grenada East, we are sincerely thankful for your sponsorship for making these projects a reality.
Do you have muscular pain that no one can find a solution for? Are you tired of taking meds for joint and other pains? Hills and Valley Medicare Center on Grenville Street, St. George is here to help you heal. We will help you map a path to your full recovery. Visit us Monday to Saturday for a consultation with our on-site doctor, physiotherapist, and massage team. You will be glad you did. Our Medicare Center, a proud member of the Hills and Valley group of companies. On the hilltop or in the valley, we are with you wherever life takes you. Hills and Valley Pharmacy. Your health is our business.
Grenada, get ready for the biggest Calypso clash of all time as Grenada takes on Trinidad at the 17th annual Hubbard's Legends in Concert. Saturday, July 8th, Grenada Trade Center from 7:30 p.m. You'll get from your our partners: Hubbard's, Grenada Paper Products, Grenville Credit Union, Biden and Miners, Gittins Healthcare, Grenada Broadcasting Network, Guardian General, Spiceside Imaging Center, Western Union, The Agriculture Shop, Clear Vision Eye Center, Springs Food Mart, Dollar Savers Auto Part, Rise and Shine Supermarket, Classic Lighting, Victory Bar, Budget Marine, Dean's Mattress, Grenada Trade Center, Creative Do It Best, Grenada Distillers Limited, Catwheels Stationery Service, Blue Bubbles, PA, Rentals and Event Supplies Company, Dana's Tasty Food, and City Inn. Please be seated by 7 p.m. because this one will be epic.
Welcome back to this evening's edition of Beyond the Headlines. We're talking CARICOM on the eve of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of our Caribbean community. When we left off, we were talking about some of the benefits that has been realized by virtue of not just the Treaty of Chaguaramas, but certainly the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas with the free movement of people, goods and services. And let me just go now to Ambassador Moses and just ask whether or not you believe, and this might be a challenging question, but whether you believe that there is a CARICOM pride among citizens within the various states of the Caribbean community.
I think there's much to be done. And it all hinges on the lack of effective communication over the period as to the potential and true benefits of CARICOM. And that speaks to the lack of resources. It speaks to the lack of an appreciation that all these things have been done, but they have not been marketed to the people. I mean, Che went ahead and spoke. There are over 15 regional institutions that serve the Caribbean quite effectively. And it can only have been achieved because it was done jointly. He spoke about health. He spoke about, quality. He spoke about disaster. All these are very real issues that daily impact the lives of Grenadians. We saw it in COVID. All of our islands do not have the capacity to have all the testing of the various diseases and viruses, but we have a central institution that does that. The entire region benefits because it's an expensive thing to do. We have the Caribbean Court of Justice, right? Moving away, hopefully, in time, all of our islands will, be members, not having to spend tremendous amount of money to go to the Privy Council in the UK. And by the way, and that's one of the challenges, why is it that all of our Caribbean territories have not embraced this institution, expeditiously? And it still has to do with maybe the lack of confidence in ourselves, the brainwashing that we have suffered over the generations, that we still do not think that we can do it together, and we have confidence in foreign institutions. So that is one of the challenges that seems to be still residual, in our quest to ensure that movement. So we did not market the tremendous benefits that every Caribbean national are accruing from the various institutions that our region has set up, and most of them are functioning very effectively. It's a long list, and Che mentioned a few. We have common policies on air transportation. We couldn't do it island by island, So that's just one example. So a lot of benefits are accruing to Caribbean citizens, but we have not done a job to market it. And people take things for granted or they do not know.
Let me
not getting into the benefits of the revised treaty and some of the things Che has went ahead and spoken about, which resonates with the small man. But it's all part of the recognition that we need to share and collaborate. And luckily, with the revised treaty, the heads recognized that we needed now to take actions to deepen the integration process, allowing for the free movement of people, capital, and businesses, etc. And that is in place, beginning to work and working much better in the OECS. And I guess we'll come to that.
Yes, but Aaron, let me ask you this. Who is responsible for the marketing? I mean, we say that, work was being done because if you light the candle and you hide it under the bushel, then, it really is problematic. Who is responsible for that marketing?
I think everyone.
But who is everyone?
You see,
if we are unaware,
is a reflection
if we're unaware of the work of CARICOM, certainly not the citizens. So it must be the leaders. It must be whether it's the secretariat, whether it's through ambassadors coming back home, sharing the achievements. Because you did agree that there isn't necessarily a sense of CARICOM pride because there's a difficulty in connecting. CARICOM Day, 4th of July is America's Independence Day to every CARICOM citizen. I doubt it was known outside of this 50th anniversary that the 4th of July is CARICOM Day? Who is responsible for us as Caribbean citizens not knowing this? And you mentioned earlier, and also cited by Che, the educational achievements, the likes of the CXC and the University of the West Indies. But if we got to speak to the education of citizens about CARICOM, then we are failing. A standard exam question probably should be CARICOM Day 4th of July. So everyone knows it before even leaving primary school. What are your thoughts and reflections?
Certainly all leaders. The CARICOM is an institution, it's a creature of all leaders. But if you do not give that institution the requisite resources to do all those things, it cannot happen. But we do not need all that resources if we are sufficiently committed, because every Caribbean leader can participate significantly in pushing that message to its people, talking about it, putting resources into it, consistent programs like we are embarking on now. What we have seen over the period, there are ups and downs, periods, of tremendous excitement. Unfortunately, it's, in my analysis, always driven by some catastrophe, some outside event that forces us to go back and revisit our strategy, to appreciate that we need to utilize our own resources to build resilience. And so when we have those international, traumas, you find that people are more prepared to collaborate together. And right now, this is an occasion. But I would argue that since the revised treaty, there have been more interest, and we see greater collaboration. And as we are facing the challenges of climate change, and all the other myriad, rising prices coming out of the geopolitical tensions, war, threats of war, it's a very unstable period in the world. And I think there's always a greater appreciation and recognition that we need to collaborate together when those things happen. It's unfortunate that it's driven by outside, but we need to inculcate in our people the benefits of collaboration. And so I would say squarely it lies on the shoulders of all leadership.
Okay.
And people like us.
If I may comment, let me piggyback off of that a little bit. I think the symptom of this is implementation deficit or challenge. What you have is you have heads of government, you have CARICOM prime ministers and leaders, government officials, technicians, and ambassadors who go to meetings. Sometimes the meetings are held privately in caucus, and then they come out, they do a press conference, you get a press release, and then it is then left, the decisions that are made in conference or decisions that are recommended from officials, member states officials, that may go to the heads. There is not any harmonized or standardized approach in terms of implementation. So what you then have is member states going back to their capitals, having agreed on a particular thing, but then there's no harmonized approach in terms of how you're going to implement. In fact, this was one of the profound criticisms of the Caribbean Court of Justice when they examined the Shanique Mary case of 2013. And that is the fact that you had member states. Number one, you did not have there was the decisions of the Conference of Heads of Government was not available for public consumption. So when we refer to the 2007 decision and we refer to the treaty of revised treaty of 2001, and I only hold this up because I was able to rescue one from a flood at home. The average Grenadian, the average CARICOM national, albeit with the advent of social media and the internet, is unable to make a connection, is unable to have access to some of the decisions that affect their lives, but particularly the issue of the implementation deficit. And that is an issue that the heads of government have, particularly in the last certainly 4 or 5 years, pre-COVID years, taken on board and want to address in a very serious way, because you still have member states that are not implementing decisions that have been made many years ago, but they're expected to influence and affect the nationals to which they represent. So the question of implementation deficit. And finally, one more thing. The Treaty of Chaguaramas, the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, does not have a punitive mechanism to hold member states accountable in the event that they do not implement a decision of the heads of government. So in other words, what if there is no consequence or there is no process of accountability, except that a national or a CARICOM entity decides to file a lawsuit of some kind, which we have not seen much of, but we're beginning to see more and more in terms of the freedom of movement of persons and so on. There's not a mechanism to hold member states accountable. There isn't. And when you don't have, if you have member states or heads of government and countries that are deciding to do one thing, and you have, for whatever reason, national considerations notwithstanding, one decides that they have a challenge either implementing or they're not, they will be denying what then becomes rights of CARICOM nationals, there's no consequence to that. And therefore, if you're unable to have a consequence or feel as though you have a redress of some kind, well, albeit you have the CCJ, it becomes a quite difficult proposition to be able to experience those benefits.
And I want you to develop, because my next line of questioning, so you preempted me, but what are some of the challenges with CARICOM and how can we get past them? So one of the things that you just cited was the implementation deficit. And that is a language that is very prevalent in Grenada of late, implementation deficit. Yes? So we're saying that we have that issue with CARICOM. And how do we get past that? You gave one recommendation that there are no punitive measures. You would recognize that one would sometimes say all politics is local, and that might be responsible for some of the lack of implementation, and there are no punitive measures if one ignores or doesn't rush to implement because of local considerations. But how can we get past some of the challenges that you would have cited? And as we move forward towards the next 50, some challenges or shortcomings that you can identify and probably recommend a strategy for us to overcome so that our community can be stronger.
Well, I think two fundamental things. One, I'll just reiterate. Number one has to do with, and Aaron mentioned it, public education and communication. You know, if you look at some of the big countries, particularly the Americans grow up knowing about their constitutional rights. Every other word out of their mouth is constitutional rights. Their first, their second, their fifth, and every other amendment that is known to man. That is not the language of the community. I don't know if the average Trinidadian or Jamaican or Grenadian starts talking about their constitutional rights on any particular issue, except every couple of years when there might be a referendum of some kind. So the question of public education, I think, is absolutely critical. I think we have to sell ourselves more and more. You have the CARICOM ambassadors, you have youth ambassadors programs, and that kind of thing. And I think the more you start getting the business of CARICOM into the consciousness of our citizens and our nationals, I think people would start to feel as though there's more there than just men in suits and ties meeting every once in a while to do what, who knows, and you hear the famous quip about CARICOM being a talk shop and that kind of thing. The other thing has to do with, I think it becomes, it's difficult when you have decisions that are made, community decisions that are made, and you don't have a very specific approach in terms of how you're going to implement it. It goes back to the technical phraseology of implementation deficit. It becomes very difficult to implement a thing if the other officials then don't sit down and decide exactly how they're going to implement the thing. And even if they do, you're absolutely right, Colin, a country will almost always pursue its national interests. And sometimes those national interests comes into conflict with the business of shagaramas. But there's a protection, and I say that with a caveat and also with hope, because even the CCJ has said that in instances where you may have a conflict between domestic legislation or national legislation relative to what has become community law by signing on to the Treaty of Shagaramas, then the provisions of the Treaty of Shagaramas and the provisions of the heads of government, the decisions of the heads of government will always prevail. But mixed into that and prior to that, you have national interests. So once you have a member state that goes back to capital or then really begins to think about the thing very deeply, it becomes it becomes challenging. And finally, I always say that personality influences public policy. And but for the Forbes Burnhams and the Eric Williams and the founding fathers, as it were, of the original Treaty of Shagaramas, and those that would have been around, the visionary leaders that we have today, the Decon Mitchells, the Mia Motleys, the Keith Rowleys, the Gonzalez of the community, and so on. I think this is a generation, and the types of personalities coming together, I think, can make a fundamental difference, because once I think there's a political, just generally a political will, there's a political camaraderie and objective to really advance and improve the lives and quality of lives of our CARICOM nationals and the community in whole. And I think if we continue to work together, there's no easy answers here. But if we continue to work together, officials, ambassadors, but particularly heads of government, and I think you will begin to see a lot more inroads as we look forward to another 50 years of CARICOM.
Aaron, I heard two things. I heard implementation deficit from Che. I heard a leadership and visionary leadership deficit, not accusing the current leaders, but there was a gap between the Eric Williams, Forbes, Burnham, and others, and the new crop. I don't know if you heard the same thing, you will tell me. And then, of course, you can always respond to Black Stalin, because by the time they drink up their whiskey, the treaty done dead already. Are these our realities, or has it been part of the reality of our 50 years?
Certainly, it has been, and but I've seen progress. And as I alluded to earlier, unfortunately, in my analysis, the progress has always been driven by external crises that forces us to rethink and to reimagine and to go back to our fundamental basics. And that's unfortunate. But I think she got it right. We have to maximize the opportunities when they arise. And I think there's a significant opportunity now, because we have a group of leaders who there's tremendous synergy. You know, they're seeing things from a different perspectives, and there's some commonality in appreciation of our challenges and what are the things that we need to do to effect some measure of transformation. But a lot of it has to do with resources. If we can find more resources, and we convince that we need to equip our secretariat and our various institutions with more resources to do what they have to do. For instance, we have seen some incremental changes with the decision with the Myrie case and the way the CCJ is interpreting and using things. And if that institution is well equipped, and I think it is, we are seeing some decisions that are, you know, awakening some of our leaders to appreciate and understand that they need to do things differently, you know. But the key point, and I agree with Shay, is that we need to educate our public. And I've been articulating that, you know, from that's putting into businesses to everything we do. If you educate your consumers, your populace, to demand a certain level of services, these are the things we expect. Your leaders will be forced to listen, because if they do not, and they do not take the appropriate actions, there are consequences. So the extent to which we educate our public about what is good for them, the benefits of CARICOM, why we should collaborate on joint efforts, the negative consequences if we try to go it alone, and people internalize that and appreciate and understand what they need to do. That is leading the way, and our leaders will be forced to fall in line.
Are we asking the same leaders to educate so that they can be forced to fall in line? I mean, are we on the, is it part of the...
It is beginning to happen. For instance, with social media, you have the CARICOM Secretariat virtually every day on social media, educating the public as to the various programs, what is happening. Incrementally over time, they will have an impact, but we need to do more of that.
Let me ask you this. Have we fell short? Because the free movement of people is a critical part of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Have we been aggressive enough as a region to ensure that interchange and exchange between and among our citizens?
No, I don't think so. And that is why the OECS is way ahead in terms of deepening the integration process and movement compared to the wider CARICOM. And so you have free access to throughout the OECS by all citizens. At the CARICOM level, that exists, but with different stipulations. You know, we have the skills certificate that certain group of, you know, nationals with certain skills can go to other territories. They can enter and spend 6 months and then, you know, come back. That doesn't exist in the OECS. So we have a deepened deeper processes that facilitate the movement of, people and resources. We have a common currency. We have a common central bank. So these are some of the things that allow the process within the OECS to be moving ahead much more rapidly relative to the wider movement.
Ambassador, to improve that interchange and exchange among CARICOM citizens?
Political will. That is central, because if we take the decision that it is absolutely necessary, it is critical for our survival, and sustained growth going forward, we will take the decisions that are beneficial. And mind you, there have not been any noticeable negative consequences. The fears that a lot of people anticipated, that we're going to lose our jobs, we'll be inundated by our neighbors coming in. That has not happened. And there are many reasons for that. Lots of people love their country. They're not prepared to move anywhere, So there has not been any significant, shifts that are causing negative consequences that, people in a particular jurisdictions cannot get a job because foreigners are taking a job. That has not happened so far. So the process is evolving. So people need to get comfortable, And when you integrate our, online access, where you can stay home and provide your goods and services to any parts of the world, people are awakening to that reality. So the mindset is changing, that we have to see ourselves as competitive and offering services to the world, and not that petty insularity, limitations that we have, allowed to hold us back as we, look at what our options are.
Jay, let me come to you. The Federation was merely 4 years. And in those 4 years, we saw, by virtue of a donation of the Canadian government, the Federal Palm and Federal Maple, two boats, multifunctional to have interchange. We saw the acquisition of the British Overseas Airways Corporation, which later became BWIA, to facilitate transportation between our territories. And we're crippled to move between our territories in 2023. So something that our past visionary leaders were able to accomplish in merely 4 years, we seem to be still struggling with after 50 years of CARICOM. And that insularity, that closed-mindedness that we see is probably because we have not been interacting with each other enough, and hence the ignorance that has caused us to be skeptical of opening up our borders and have that interchange. How would you respond? And one, well, along with the fact that, do we need to do more to ensure our people learn more about each other, as opposed to just going after the US or Canada because it's quite frankly cheaper?
Well, you hit on a point that I wrote down here, and that's a question of regional transportation, air transport. I think two fundamental things. Before I get to transport, number one, I think the categories of persons that are allowed to move under the skills regime needs to be expanded. This started under Article 46 with 5 categories: sports persons, media workers, artists, musicians. But then it expanded to additional 5, and within the last 2 years prior to COVID, we expanded it to additional private security officers as well as agricultural workers. So now you have a 12 category under the skills regime, whereby persons are able to move under the skills regime. But I think, and this has been, there's been some call in some of the other member states that you simply have to open it up, and member states have agreed to do so as they, on their own speed, so to speak. But I think if you start opening up categories or remove classes and groupings of individuals who are allowed to come to work in member states, as the OECS has done, and you make regional travel far more affordable, so that people can move. If people don't have an access to move or means to move, and if people can afford to move, then the business of Caribbean integration by way of CSME, perhaps the freedom of movement of persons, there's not a whole lot of freedom there, and there's certainly not affordable movement at all. We've seen regional integration seems to work best at certain points: carnivals, cricket World Cups, even drag racing, where somebody may charter a boat or some kind and go down to Trinidad and Tobago, go to St. Lucia. For my own part, I'm not advocating that we go back to the days of of sailing the high seas to travel from one member state to the other. I think you have to move a lot advance and be more forward thinking than that. But I think if regional travel, which has been a perennial problem, certainly with the demise of LIAT 1974, that becomes more affordable and available arrangement for all of the member states, and if categories of individuals can move freely without any types of restrictions, then I think the business of increased economic activity, I think the business of getting access to opportunities from one member state to the next, I think becomes more of a real prospect, and I think that's the direction that we need to go. The advent of
would you then recommend that Grenada abolishes or significantly reduces its taxes and levies on air transportation? And even if as an experiment, start off with Trinidad, our closest neighbor. We talk about the demise of LIAT 1974. We talk about the expense of air travel between our territories. But when we look at the breakout of that ticket, almost 50% of the charges paid by the passenger goes to government or an airport authority. That in of itself is debilitating. So it is not the airline that is charging us. They're collecting the money on behalf of governments. And the likes of a Barbados and a Grenada are quite high compared to other territories. There's no harmony in what the charges are as you look from one government to the next. And I'm going to get onto the movement of skills shortly, but I'm just speaking now of us learning about each other to reduce the skepticism, to bring us closer together as a Caribbean people.
I think it's a very difficult. I think it's easy to say to remove taxes, and you're right when you say that about 50% of airline ticket taxes are taxes. Airline tickets are taxes, but it costs to travel. And I think when you have a Dash 8 or ATR or whatever it is that they're flying now with Inter-Caribbean, that has a double propeller or twin propeller aircraft, and it has to take off in 15, 20 minutes and another 5 minutes before it gets to 20,000 feet. And then within 30 or 40 minutes lands in Trinidad and Tobago, 45 minutes lands in Barbados. And that kind of regular, almost bus-like type of operation is high operational cost to that. Someone has to pay for it.
But where I'm going is that the 400 US, or let's go 300, I'll be conservative. The 300 US it costs to get to Trinidad. 150 goes to the airline, and the next 150 goes to government. And that second 150 is what I'm addressing. Because you're right, the operational cost must be met. The question is whether our governments should make an investment in lowering the taxes and levies in order to ensure travel. Because whereas that 150 may cause an individual or family not to travel, if they do travel, if they're incentivized by the reduction of the cost, they're going to spend on island more than 150 anyway. But it should not be a choice for a Trinidadian looking for a last long weekend, June 19, to be debating whether to come to Grenada or go to Miami because it is cheaper to get to Miami.
I think that's a very more protracted discussion. I think the government has to get revenue somewhere, and whether or not they want to forgo it in ticket taxation, and with the prospect of getting tourism sales or tourism bodies in room stock and that kind of thing. I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I find it anything to do with economics and the question of revenue loss in any way, shape, or form, particularly with our main means of transportation being regional transportation and international airlines, where you have certain airlines that you're paying to come, paying to fill empty seats. You have those that were part of the LIAT 1974, now LIAT 2020 construct that were subsidizing LIAT for many, many, many years, and I'm not too sure what are the intimate economics of the inter-Caribbean arrangement. I think when you have all of those economic variables, I think it complexes the idea it creates a complexity of the idea of simply removing ticket taxes. And then the very nature of the airline industry and certainly regional transportation, the question of economies of scale and the volumes of passenger load from one member state to the other, cost of fuel, operational costs, staffing, and that kind of thing. I think it becomes a far more protracted discussion, and it becomes very difficult to simply say to remove the ticket tax. I think that's a very easy fix, but I think you may have unintended consequences in the event that one was to take that type of policy decision.
So well, I agree with some of the things that she has said, but I also would posit the fact that we cannot continue to do the same thing over and over again, not find a solution. I think we need to take some bold decisions. We have enough data to appreciate and understand what are the challenges of airline, traffic in the region. Some of the problems she already mentioned. So we know what they are. So we need to find the solutions. What is it that we can do? Certainly, we need to ensure that we run an efficient organization, and everybody is comfortable that it's being run efficiently and it's not padded up cost somewhere that somebody is exploiting that institution. So we need to have a model, preferably a private sector driven model, that we comfortable that is going to be run efficiently and effectively. Our governments need to take bold decisions and to do something different rather than to saddle a ticket cost with. So let us try something different and see whether the revenue cannot come from elsewhere. We cannot stipulate that we want an airline to come and pick up 4 and 5 persons when we know that's an uneconomic route. So we have to try something different and be prepared to do it. So I think that we cannot sit by and live with some of the things that we have been living with before. And maybe that's the reason why it's taking so long for something to happen. But it is absolutely necessary. She mentioned the fact that we're literally paying some airlines to come into the region under the notion that it's important for them to bring persons to fill our current tourism plan. But should we continue to do this over and over? When, for instance, in Grenada, we understand that we need to have a minimum of 4,500 rooms, which in the view of the airlines is an economic number of rooms that will allow me to make a decision to increase my flights into the region. Well, if that is so, our focus should be on attracting a few large-sized family types hotels to build that room capacity and put our money there to ensure that we will be able to attract consistent airline flights into Grenada without having to spend money supporting or paying them in effect to come to Grenada. So these are some of the bold decisions, in my view, that we need to take. Some may take a few years to do, but we have to be focused on taking these strategic decisions that can enable us to retain more of that tourist dollar and not spend money routinely over and over, and we basically just maintaining the ship. And that cannot make a significant dent on our unemployment challenges. That cannot generate growth in excess of 5% that is necessary to ensure that we can sustain the livelihood of our people going forward. So I agree with what you're saying, but I think we need to try new things.
All righty. And one new thing that I will try now is to take a break, and then we will come back with further discussion. So viewers, we'll be right back.
Have you heard about the new Softweed bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Soft Weave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue, available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Soft Weave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
In our part of the world, we need to be prepared for natural disasters like storms and hurricanes, even outside of the season. I'm sure you'll agree that keeping our loved ones, homes, and businesses safe is important. So, I came up with a few quick tips to help you stay safe. Familiarize yourself with your electrical panel, as it may be necessary to switch off the power during a storm or flood. Make sure you install a transfer or isolation switch to prevent your generator feeding electricity to Grenlec's line. If trees are too close to power lines, call Grenlec at 237 for advice. By following these easy steps, you will be well on your way to being hurricane ready. Don't be caught off guard by natural disasters. Prepare now. For more information, visit grenlec.com.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners. Time is certainly flying by. We're now into the final segment of this Beyond the Headlines program. When we left off, we were speaking about the free movement of people and the importance of that. Ambassador Phillip also mentioned the increased number of professions that have been allowed that free movement to ply their trade across the CARICOM region. I am made aware, gentlemen, of one professional pharmacist who have traveled from a CARICOM territory because of the shortage of their skill here in Grenada, and have been told that this individual has a CARICOM skills certificate. But they have been told that in order for them to be duly licensed, they must give 4 months of free service at a government facility before being allowed to work with the private entity that attracted them to Grenada. Is this scenario in keeping with your understanding of the free movement of people? University graduate with a CARICOM skills certificate coming into Grenada, but in order to be duly licensed to practice as a pharmacist, they are being required to do 4 months free service before being that license being fully effective. Your thoughts?
Well, I can jump on that very quickly. That is absolutely wrong. Does not exist anywhere in the CSME framework or construct. If someone is a university graduate, put quite simply, they get a skill certificate. They have a skill certificate from another member state and they come into Grenada with that skill certificate. There's a verification process that takes place post-entry, which simply requires them to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get the skill certificate that they have coming in. And by the way, when they come in with that skill certificate, if they're CARICOM national, they get 6 months. If they are CARICOM national with a skill certificate, they get treated as under the CSME skills provision. The verification process simply requires that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would take that document and verify it go through a verification process of making an inquiry from the issuing country of that skill certificate. And in the interim, the national that has come in with that skill certificate is allowed to work as a university graduate, they're entitled to work in the jurisdiction of Grenada. Now, if they are pharmacists, if they are medical doctor, of course, they have to make sure that they go through the proper registration with the competent authority in their particular profession. But outside of that, or in addition to that, there is no requirement for that national or for that individual to have any sort of residency, any sort of service, any sort of work for whatever you want to call it with anybody. Whoever is given that directive or given that type of information is absolutely wrong. That person has to get in contact with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs immediately and rectify that problem. There's no such requirement. Post-entry and post-verification, they then get, which is the final feature, which all CARICOM nationals who are coming in under the skills regime, they then get what is called the indefinite entry status, which is the status that all skilled CARICOM nationals seek to get coming in under the skills regime.
All right. And is it correct in terms of my understanding that the reason why, I mean, and we're talking now of the original purpose of the CCJ is to deal with these cases, the implementation of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. That's important. And one of the things they look at is to ensure that CARICOM citizens are not treated differently from citizens of the home territory. And if this is the case, that will be a violation. Is that interpretation correct?
Well, yes, that's article. You're referring to Article 7 and 8 that talks about non-discrimination and most favored nation treatment. Article 7 and 8 makes that very clear. So, in other words, a CARICOM national, well, specifically, a CARICOM national who comes into a member state ought not to be treated any different than a CARICOM national of another member state, or ought not to be treated any different from a national from a third country. In addition to which, there ought not to be any discrimination applied to any CARICOM national coming in, any prejudice or discrimination applied to any CARICOM national coming into the jurisdiction under the auspices of the CSME and or Chaguaramas.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Our time is going to expire quickly. So I would push out CARICOM and education, some of the benefits. I know we touched on some before, but if you can just emphasize CARICOM, education.
You want to jump in there?
Well, there are a number of regional programs. As you know, CARICOM treat with multilateral institutions, and they have a number of programs in various of the functionalities that we mentioned to earlier, and education is certainly one. So those programs are for the entire CARICOM region, and so the nature of some of the programs, individual CARICOM territories benefit immensely. And we spoke earlier on about CXC, the management of CXC and the various associated programs to develop particular areas of our educational challenges, both at the OECS level and at the CARICOM level. For instance, I'm aware of a new OECS initiative that is being worked on now, that all our ministries of education within the OECS, if they access that particular program and government commit to increasing the annual contribution as a percentage of GDP that goes into education, they can benefit from funding. So there are a number of initiatives and programs that, through the collaboration, programs that individually governments would not have benefited from, they are now benefiting from that collaborative approach. A number of our external multilateral institutions and some countries prefer to deal with a regional organization rather than treating with each individual country for multiplicity of reasons. It is much simpler, it is much cheaper, and it's more efficient. And so through that mechanism, all the ministries of education are benefiting from current and ongoing program and ongoing negotiated programs for the growth and development of education.
All right, CARICOM and agriculture. And when I speak agriculture, I'm not just talking primary agriculture, but secondary and even tertiary. What are some of the benefits that CARICOM has brought to agriculture, especially in an era where we're speaking of food security, food safety? Just educate our population, please.
Well,
again, okay, go ahead.
You have the Caribbean Research Development Institute in the form of CARDI that seeks to provide technical assistance and coordinate and harmonize agricultural policies within the member states. I think, again, I have to go back to the CSME. It would be remiss of me if I didn't do so. You now have an arrangement where you have persons who are agricultural workers are able to move from one member state to the next. The Americans have historically received Grenadians and Caribbean people who go and they pick oranges and they pick different types of things, seasonality within United States jurisdiction. You have the same thing that now exists in terms of a category of individuals, the agricultural workers who are able to move from one member state to another for the purposes of engaging in agricultural type work.
All right. CARICOM and climate change, or climate smart, recognizing that we are small island states. We talk about rising sea levels. We're going to be losing some of our coastal borders. CARICOM and climate change. Is there anything that we can point to as a benefit or a thrust?
Certainly. Well, before you go there, there's also the CARICOM health and food safety, which is a very big issue, ensuring that we have the right foods coming into the region, they're properly tested, you understand what you're feeding your people. That's a very active program that's going on under the agricultural. And of course, climate change, or could I use the word, the flavor of the last two decades, and the recognition worldwide now that it is real. And so there's a hell of a lot happening. There are a number of regional institutions that are set up to help guide and chart the joint collaboration and negotiations of the region as we engage the rest of the world in attempting to treat with the challenges that we are confronting now. As island states, you know the issues that we have to deal with: rising sea levels. It's a significant one. You know, there are a number of programs, you know, and it's occupying a lot of funding and attention. And so, again, the benefits are the joint collaborative approach, bringing negotiation strength to the table, and that is of tremendous benefits. And I would say to you that the world have recognized the strength of the region voting as a unit, you know, with 15 CARICOM countries and 5 associate members. And so they have been trekking through the Caribbean, looking for support. And we have to maximize and use our leverage at this point in time to ensure that we negotiate what's in our best interest. And we bring a number of programs looking at various components of our climate change challenge and use that for the benefit of our region. So a lot is happening under the series of climate change programs. And all of that is emanating from our joint collaborative approach.
Beautiful. Let me just ask you this. Is CARICOM united on renewable energy? Again, this will be part of climate change. Are we united on renewable energy, recognizing that some of our territories make quite some happy sums from fossil fuel? Trinidad, of course, has been for quite some time, and Guyana, as we are aware, are now benefiting from the new finds in oil.
Certainly there are, but I think there's a common recognition of the need for maximizing our renewable energy options. And so while a particular country, in the case of Guyana, with its newfound oil, but there are a number of other programs that are attempting to address maximizing renewable energy options. But for countries like LDCs that are not able to maximize fossil fuels at this point in time, whether they should or should not, our options reside in different approaches, looking at our geothermal prospects, wind energy, solar energy, etc. So it's a collaborative approach, recognizing the different resource capacities of the various territories, but I think collectively there is that appreciation and understanding that renewables will have to play a very pivotal role going forward as we attempt to, you know, treat with our resource base.
Okay. CARICOM and ICT both as a tool as well as a product for exportation. Is there any collaboration on that front? Recognizing that it serves as a platform for us to improve our processes, our efficiencies, but also it is itself can be used as a product. So any collaborations in that regard? It
is a very critical functional area. And one of the things we didn't mention in the structure of CARICOM is that we have a number, each CARICOM leader is allocated a particular portfolio. So like in Grenada's case, Grenada is supposed to lead on ICT issues. And I think that structure reflects the importance that the CARICOM region places on key functional areas. And certainly ICT and telecommunications is a very strategic and important one. So that is being led at this point by Grenada as Prime Minister who has the responsibility for treating with the various programs. But it is a very important functional area that the region is collaborating on, ICT and telecommunications development.
And I think very quickly, Colin, that in the advent of the Unleash symposium that we saw several weeks ago, I think that highlighted some of the features that we would like to see in terms of our artists and the creatives using their platforms and using their platform to be competitive in their particular industries, and therefore making sustainable development in the field of creatives, but using an ICT type platform, the social medias, the Twitters, the Zooms, and all the variety of options that are there. And certainly with the quasi-cabinet portfolio that the Honourable Prime Minister has, I think you've begun to see the type of initiative and thrust that this administration has focused on in using ICT and incorporating it into the profession of the creatives and those of that ilk to be able to advance our development.
Let me just ask you this: is these quasi-portfolios part of the challenges of an advanced CARICOM region? And let me just bring it home. If we assign portfolios based on country, we may very well have a leader that is not au fait with the assignment. Grenada has been ICT. I believe I've heard cricket for Grenada. As well. In other words, we may have strength in one area and be weak in another. And should these assignments be based on the individual leaders or on territories? And can we expect to have good movement for the development of that discipline in the region if we have a leader that is either not interested or it is not an area of strength for that particular leader?
My understanding is that the allocation in the past would have been based on the interests of that particular leader and what they have demonstrated based on their initiatives and programs. But more importantly, you are leading with the support of the technical capacity and competence of CARICOM in that particular area. So you're bringing your leadership skills, marrying that with the technical advice and the work program of the relevant unit within the CARICOM area. So the leader does not necessarily have to have, say, a background in that particular area. It will certainly help, but he is bringing his leadership skills to marry that with the competence of the technical unit who is supposed to provide the support. So the leader is leading, opening doors, collaborating with his peers and international institutions, etc. So it's a collaborative effort.
Okay.
But Colin, you're absolutely right. I think if you have a leader that is lackluster or unenthusiastic or uninterested, certainly discernibly so, in a particular portfolio responsibility, I think it perhaps can show. But Aaron is absolutely right. And the leader they're not doing it by themselves. They're not going out. You may see the symbolic health walks and different types of things taking place, which is well in order. But they're as good as the supporting team and the technical officers that are around them who are there to advance the portfolio.
I would not say that you said that leaders are figureheads.
I didn't say that.
Good. All right. Let me just move on. Guyana does not discriminate, to the best of my knowledge, of how they operate for CARICOM nationals in terms of pricing for healthcare and for education. Free education is for free education, whether you're Guyanese or you're a member of CARICOM. Would we see other members of CARICOM being this open to embracing the CARICOM common community that we would expect in the region?
I think we're getting there. I think we have had historical challenges, sometimes with some of our closest neighbors. We've had cases where we've had, in our case, Grenadians who whose children have been born in Barbados, born somewhere else, but they've lived the better part of their lives in Grenada, and then they become of age and they're ready to work. And because they have a Trinidad passport or because they have a Grenadian passport, they're suddenly being told that they need to get a work permit. We've had those instances. I think we're getting there very slowly, but I think it's going to require a lot of work. There has to be a lot of constant training of those that are responsible for the business of implementation. There has to be constant public education, and starting from the school system, the primary and the secondary school system, where the curriculum, and I know a little bit of it is in the actual social studies curriculum, but I think there has to be more of a concerted and repeated effort to educate, to remove the business of regional prejudice or discrimination against other member states. So a person is not viewed as a Guyanese or viewed as a Trini or viewed as a Vinci and so on, but viewed as a citizen, or they're viewed as a CARICOM national, a CARICOM citizen. And I think when you have that kind of repeated effort to win hearts and minds, as I call it, I think you can slowly begin to see the change in policy. So whether it's the credit unions that changing bylaws to include CARICOM nationals, or the Prime Minister's recent indication as of the last few days to remove alien landholding license requirement for persons coming into the jurisdiction, you begin slowly to break down those barriers and those restrictions, as it were, that will then really begin to include and make all CARICOM nationals feel truly members of the community and also give a national treatment.
I'm moving to closing comments, and that was a powerful embrace there, Che, but I must come back to you because I didn't tell you what your closing comments as yet. So I'll come back for closing comments from you. So closing comments from you, Aaron. So I'll start off with you deliberately now. And, you know, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary, how would you best like to see us celebrate 50 years of our Caribbean community? And now, but certainly things that we can do to make that celebration even better from year to year.
Well, I'll also want to add to that to let the Grenadian public know what Grenada is doing for the celebration. I think that's very important. But certainly, I think the timing is right. We need to seize the time. The leadership we have, the environmental circumstances all point in one direction, that we need to collaborate to build resilience. And I think central to that is a new approach to educating and informing our people as to what is it we are doing, why we are doing it, what are the potential benefits, and the reason depth why this is inevitable that we do. And that has to be on a sustained basis, drilling home the tangible benefits that have been accruing and can continue to accrue to every citizen of CARICOM. So more information, I think, is going to be key going forward. And to celebrate the 50th anniversary, Grenada is doing a number of things, as you indicated earlier on. It's going to be a holiday to celebrate the 3rd of July, but specifically a number of events are going to be taking place. Two key ones that the public need to be aware of is that there will be a road race on Sunday starting at 4 p.m. at the stadium, and that road race will travel along Melville Street, Carenage, Tantine, Paddock, Springs, Woodlands, Grandlands Valley, up and down the Morris Bishop Highway, then the Montrouge Loop, and ending on the Montrouge playing field. So it's going to be coordinated by the Grenada Athletic Association. So we're asking all Grenadians to come out and share your runners, those of you who want to participate in that road race, and to join them at the end of that road race. On Monday, there'll be a flag raising ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. And most importantly, there'll be a fitness walk and cultural extravaganza. That fitness walk starts at the Ministerial Complex at 2:30 p.m. and ends at the Camahorn Park. So it's not a very long walk. There's tremendous interest. So they'd like as many Grenadians as possible to come and join them at that walk. at the Camahon Park, there'll be a mini trade show and food and eat and drinks from various Caribbean territories on sale. Along with that, there will be a cultural event, including a number of our top Californians, steel band, the police band will be there, dancers will be there. And that event will be from 3 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. So it's going to be a family event. It's going to be a holiday. So maximize this opportunity. And we're looking forward to have as much Grenadians as possible join us at that event. Thank you.
All right, Jay. How do you want to celebrate? Go ahead.
We've spent a lot of time tonight talking about the responsibility and being held accountable as Caribbean leaders and government officials. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think there's a dual responsibility that I believe has to be had here. And that is the question of CARICOM nationals also taking personal responsibility for their governance and also holding their leaders accountable. The Treaty of Chaguaramas is a document or a book that I think every CARICOM national, every Grenadian and CARICOM national has to become very familiar with. The decisions of the heads of government. I think there's information that you have to seek out there. There's the advent of social media. There's all kinds of things that give you less and less of a reason or excuse to not know what is happening. And while leaders and officials like ourselves certainly have a broad responsibility to bring the information, create the mechanisms and infrastructure to be able to allow you to benefit from the decisions of the institutions of CARICOM and the decisions of heads of government, particularly. I think there's also a responsibility that nationals need to have. CARICOM is alive, CARICOM is well. We need to perhaps engage in more what I would call diplomatic evangelism and speak of our good works with respect to the decisions of the community heads and what is happening in terms of all of the organs and to get more of a public education out there. But I want to encourage every Grenadian, every national that is listening to me to take more of effort and take more responsibility in finding out what is happening in a community, seek the information out, find out what is happening in terms of the work programs that take place in the community. And with that dual approach and that dual responsibility that I think that ought to be shared on both sides, I think CARICOM will continue to be alive and well and for another 50 years.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Aaron Moses, Ambassador Che Phillip, for joining us and sharing on this conversation about CARICOM on the eve of its 50th anniversary. To you, our viewers and listeners, likewise, thank you for sharing the last 95 minutes with us, speaking about CARICOM. We can do it well together. Yes, we are Grenadians, but we are Caribbean peoples, and there is strength in unity. If we buy local, if we buy regional, there is strength. If we collaborate, if we cooperate, we'll all be better off. And the xenophobic attitudes that insularity sometimes creeps in, we gotta stamp it out if we are to be better as a people and certainly as a region. I thank you once again for joining us. Have yourselves a wonderful evening, and I look forward to joining you again 6 days, 22 and a half hours from now. Pleasant night all. Godspeed.
Night. Thank you so much for having us. Thanks.
My pleasure being here. Good evening, everyone.
Night.
Excellent.